The night my father came back from my house, the radiators were already dead. I could see my breath in the dark of Everwood's front hall, little ghosts drifting in front of the stained glass, while Barnaby shivered against my legs under an old quilt. Outside, snow swallowed the town in that heavy, suffocating silence you only get right before something breaks. Then I saw them, headlights idling at the end of my driveway, engine rumbling, low, familiar silhouette of my father's SUV parked right where he'd sat for hours spying on me days before. They'd already cut my power. They'd already tried to have me dragged off as unstable. Tonight they were coming to finish the job. But what they didn't know was that Everwood House didn't really belong to me anymore. Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever had someone in your own family twist the truth about you. Trust me, what happened next at Everwood House is something no one in Willow Creek was ready for. I didn't always know I'd spend most of my adulthood trying to build a life far away from the people who raised me. In fact, if you'd met me at 12, you would have seen a girl who still believed her family was normal, loud, messy, tired, but normal. It took years before I understood that some homes don't break all at once. They crack quietly in places no one looks, until one day you realize the floor underneath you was never solid to begin with. One of my earliest memories is of a dinner table that always felt slightly tilted toward my brother Ethan. Our kitchen smelled like overcooked meatloaf and cheap detergent, the kind that stung your nose. I remember sitting there, my legs swinging because they couldn't reach the floor yet, watching my mom scoop the crispy edge of the meatloaf, the best part, onto Ethan's plate. He was grinning, bragging about some tiny trophy he won at a school carnival. Mom laughed. Dad nodded like Ethan had cured cancer. I held up the drawing I'd worked on all week, a little sketch of an old Victorian house I'd loved from a book. Nobody looked. The drawing slowly lowered to my lap like it was ashamed of existing. That was the first time I realized praise in my house was a single spotlight, and it never turned my way. Years later, the pattern sharpened instead of fading. At 14, I won a regional architecture contest, my first real taste of the thing that would eventually save me. I stood on that stage in a stiff white dress, hands cold sweat sticking my hair to my neck. When the announcer called my name, I scanned the crowd for my parents. They weren't there. 10 minutes later, they walked in holding balloons for Ethan, who'd just finished basketball practice. After the ceremony, every photo they took was of Ethan holding my certificate, while I stood next to him half-cropped, as if the whole thing had been his achievement. I didn't know it then, but that night planted the seed of something I would spend years untangling: the belief that my worth only existed in the shadows of someone else's spotlight. By college, I had stopped expecting much. I worked part-time as a campus assistant, graded drafts for upper-year students, and folded clothes in a department store until my fingers ached. Every paycheck went into two piles, one for rent, one for family emergencies. My mom always had an emergency, a bill that needed paying, a prescription that insurance didn't cover, a crisis Ethan caused that she quietly shifted onto me. I told myself I was being a good daughter. I told myself that's what family did, but it always felt like the more I gave, the more they took. And whenever I tried to ask why the weight only landed on me, my mom would tilt her head, soften her voice, and say, "You're the strong one, Claire. Ethan needs help right now." Right now lasted 10 years. Then came the first real betrayal, the one that changed the trajectory of my life without me fully realizing it. I was 24, sitting at the same dinner table that once held meatloaf and forgotten sketches. Dad leaned forward, arms crossed, voice low, like he was confessing something sacred. "Sweetheart," he said, "I need your signature on something small." Just a formality. It was the loan for Morgan's Grill, a family restaurant he claimed would set us all up for life. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't want to say yes, but Mom touched her chest dramatically, exhaled, like the world was sitting on her ribcage, and murmured, "Your father's been under so much stress." I signed. A year later, the restaurant failed. Dad vanished whenever the collectors came calling. And the bills, they all had my name on them. I didn't know it then, but that loan was only the beginning. A thread in a long web of debts my father had quietly tied to my identity, some going all the way back to when I was in college. I would only discover that much later, when it was already too late to pretend I still had a family. Around this time, I met Barnaby. Rain hammered the shelter's roof the day I adopted him. The place smelled like bleach and wet fur and sadness. A volunteer walked me past rows of barking dogs, until we reached a crate in the back. A thin, older dog lay curled in the corner, his fur patchy, a long scar, like a burn tracing his side. The moment I knelt, he lifted his head just slightly and looked at me with this raw, terrified hope. He's not what most adopters want, the volunteer warned. I didn't care. I understood the look of someone who'd learned the hard way that love comes with conditions. I signed the papers. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone driving home. My 20s blurred into long nights and longer shifts. I became the kind of person who drank too much coffee, skipped meals, and had permanent ink smudges on my fingers from drafting renovation plans. I took the worst projects because no one else wanted them: collapsed porches, moldy basements, houses one winter away from falling to pieces. Maybe because I understood the feeling. It was during one of these projects that my supervisor mentioned an opening at Willow Creek Heritage Trust. A historic Victorian house, Everwood, was up for restoration, and they needed someone obsessive enough to resurrect every last creaking board. I applied. I got it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't running towards something, I was running away. Everwood House wasn't beautiful yet when I first saw it. The windows were clouded, the porch sagged, and the air smelled like damp wood. But when I touched the old banister dust sliding under my palm, something inside me clicked. This house wasn't perfect, but it was mine to protect. I didn't know it then, but saving Everwood would become the most important fight of my life. The job with Willow Creek Heritage Trust was the first time paperwork felt like a life raft. On the surface, it was simple. The trust owned Everwood House. I managed it. No emotion in the language, just clauses and signatures. But when the lawyer Graham Adler pushed the folder toward me, he didn't sound attached at all. In plain English, he said, pen tapping the page, "Your family can't touch this place. Not without going through a board that doesn't share their last name. No surprise mortgages, no temporary transfers. If anyone shows up with documents you do not sign, you call me first." His office smelled like stale coffee and paper. A radiator hissed behind him. My palms were sweating. "Do you know my father?" I asked. Graham's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We were on opposite sides of a case once." He walked out furious. I took that as a compliment. I could have asked what my father had done, why this man was warning me so bluntly. Instead, I nodded, signed where he pointed, and told myself the past was a separate life I'd finally closed the door on. Moving into Everwood felt like stepping into that new life. The first night, the upstairs hall was so cold, my breath came out in small clouds. I dragged a mattress into the smallest bedroom, the only one I could coax the old radiators into warming, and piled every blanket I owned on top. Barnaby paced once, twice, then dropped heavily against my legs, his body heat seeping through the covers. The house creaked and sighed around us. In my parents' place, those sounds had always meant trouble. My father slamming cabinets, my brother stomping upstairs, my mother crying in the kitchen. Here it was just pipes, wind, old wood settling. No one was drunk. No one was yelling my name. The quiet pressed on my chest in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, like a weight I actually wanted. Days filled up with work. I woke in the half-light, drank bitter coffee, and attacked whatever part of the house I could afford to fix that week. I peeled off stained wallpaper and found hand-painted vines underneath. I pried up cheap vinyl squares and uncovered wide boards that still glowed under the dust. The more I restored, the more the house stopped feeling like a ruin and started feeling like something that had been waiting very patiently to be cared for. That was when Liam Hart walked in. He arrived on a Tuesday, boots knocking snow off on the front step. "Claire," he called, voice echoing in the foyer. "Liam, Historical Society sent me. I'm supposed to make sure you're not paving over artifacts." "Depends," I said. "What if the artifacts are ugly?" He grinned. "Then they're even more historic." We shook hands in the cold hall, both of us with cracked knuckles and dirt under our nails. After that, he was just there out in the yard, digging in the carriage house, brushing dirt off broken glass, appearing in the kitchen with his notebook and a thermos. We didn't talk much at first. It was more like we worked beside each other in two connected bubbles. On a gray afternoon, snow feathering down outside, Liam leaned against the counter and said, "I worked on a project a few years back. Morgan Estates, out by the highway. That your dad's?" Eyes stiffened. "Yeah. He tried to skip paying half the crew," Liam said. "My boss got a lawyer involved. I remember your father not taking it well." He said it calmly, like commenting on the weather. I made some joke about that sounding familiar, but inside something shifted. For years I'd been told I was ungrateful whenever I complained, dramatic, whenever I pointed at the damage. Hearing a stranger quietly confirm his story, matched mine, made me feel less crazy and more angry. My mother, meanwhile, refused to accept my distance. She texted photos of Ethan in front of a new car, Ethan at a work party, Ethan holding a certificate I'd never heard about. Underneath, "We miss you. It would mean so much if you came home. Ethan worries. Dad's heart hasn't been the same. guilt packaged like concern. Ethan didn't call, not once. That first Thanksgiving at Everwood, my phone lit up on the dusty kitchen counter while I sat outside on the front steps, holding a board in place for Liam. The air smelled like sawdust and cold metal. Mom's name glowed on the screen, then went dark when I didn't move. "You driving down?" Liam asked. "No," I said. He glanced at my phone, then at me. Good. The word shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Nothing exploded because I didn't show up. No one ended up in the hospital. They ate dinner without me. I painted trim reheated pasta, watched a movie with Barnaby snoring at my feet, and realized that sometimes not answering was its own decision. I didn't know it then, but that quiet no was the first real line I drew that my family didn't immediately erase. After that, I guarded Everwood like a secret. On forms, I used a P.O. box in the next town over. I turned off location tags, avoided posting anything that looked like an address. The people in Willow Creek knew where the house sat on the hill, of course, but my parents lived hours away and almost never visited the town unless there was money in it. Distance and silence felt like walls, and for once, the walls were working. None of us knew that one anonymous photo of colored glass would be the breadcrumb my mother had been waiting for. The first sign that everything I'd built was about to crumble didn't come in the form of a loud crash or a phone call. It came disguised as something harmless, almost stupidly so. A picture. A close-up of Everwood's rose window. It was early December, the kind of brittle morning where sunlight looks sharp instead of warm. I'd spent the night sanding the frame around the stained glass because the original wood had gone soft from decades of condensation. Barnaby lay nearby, chin on his paws, tail thumping lazily against the boards every time I spoke to him like he was a coworker. When the restoration was finished, the sun hit that window in a way that made the colors flare like fire through the dust. I snapped a photo cropped tightly around the glass and posted it to an anonymous architecture forum. No tags, no hints, just finished this panel today. Late Victorian hand cut. I didn't think twice. People posted details from their projects all the time. 2 weeks later, the Willow Creek Historical Society reshared my photo with the full address of Everwood House on their public Facebook page, gushing about the ongoing preservation work. I was in the middle of brushing snow off the porch railing when my phone pinged with the notification. I stared at the post, my heart dipping low in my stomach. It's fine, I told myself. My family doesn't follow these pages. They barely know how to use the internet unless it's Facebook. But as the hours passed, that uneasy feeling clung to me like damp cold. I kept hearing Graham's voice. Don't post anything that makes your address obvious. Don't underestimate how people find what they want. I forced myself to push the thought aside. It was a house, a job, a new life, not something fragile enough to be destroyed by a single picture. I didn't know then that it was the breadcrumb my mother had been waiting years for. 3 days after the post went live, I woke to engines. Loud, aggressive, wrong for a quiet winter morning in Willow Creek. I sat up on the mattress, confused. Barnaby's head shot up, ears forward, body tense. Then the sound came again, tires grinding through slush. The deep rumble of large engines crawling up the long driveway. "No," I whispered before I had any proof. "No, no, no." Barnaby beat me to the front hall. I threw on boots without socks, grabbed my coat, and raced toward the front window. 2 black SUVs, a huge rental truck, all lined up at my gate like they were preparing for an extraction mission. The breath left my body so fast my vision pulsed. I didn't need to see the faces to know who was inside. I could recognize the shape of my father's SUV anywhere, the same vehicle he'd used to tail debt collectors 2 houses over. When I was a teenager, claiming he was just checking the neighborhood. Before the first door even opened, I was running. Snow stung my cheeks as I skidded toward the gate. Barnaby bounded beside me, barking. But it wasn't his protective bark. It was the frantic kind, the one he used when memories clawed up from wherever he kept them buried. Dad stepped out first, adjusting his wool coat like he was arriving at brunch instead of ambushing his daughter's home. "Well, look at this place," he said brightly, surveying Everwood like he'd built it himself. "You've been busy." My throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" He spread his arms, voice warm enough to fool a stranger. "Sweetheart, we're home. Home." The word hit like a blow to the ribs. Ethan climbed out of the truck, already barking orders at 2 men in the back to unload the heavy server racks. He didn't even look at me. "Careful with those casings," he snapped. "Don't scratch anything." I moved in front of the gate grip, white-knuckled on the iron bars. "You need to leave. Now." Dad clicked his tongue like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Claire. Let's not start the morning like this. You can't be here. This is private property." "It's our family home," he said softly. as if the words alone might hypnotize me into agreement. It's not. Everwood belongs to the trust, and you don't have a lease. You don't have anything. Actually, Dad said, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. We do. A cold shock pulsed through me. I know you've been stressed, he went on, gently unfolding the papers with exaggerated care. You probably don't remember signing this, but Ethan has a 5-year rental agreement for the basement. $1 a month. Very reasonable, right? He held it up between us. My signature, my handwriting stared back at me. For a moment, the world around me blurred. The snow, the truck, Ethan's voice. Barnaby's whining it all collapsed inward. I didn't sign that, I choked. Dad tilted his head. Sweetheart, your memory's always been a little unreliable when you're overwhelmed. My chest tightened with the sharp, familiar sting of gaslighting. You forged this, I whispered. He sighed, pained. Claire, I'm your father. I'd never, but I knew the truth. I could see it in the way he stood, too relaxed, too rehearsed. Before I could scream, before I could yank the gate shut, a van pulled up behind their convoy. A locksmith stepped out, toolbox banging against his leg. Dad turned to him instantly, slipping into a mask of worried parental concern. Officer, thank you for coming. My daughter is having an episode. She's locked herself inside and won't let us in. The locksmith hesitated, looked at Dad, then at me. I don't live with them, I said sharply. He's lying. This is my property. I'm perfectly fine. Dad lowered his voice and sighed loudly enough for the man to hear. She gets like this when she's spiraling. It's so painful to watch. Don't you dare, I snapped. But the locksmith raised his drill. Barnaby's panic hit instantly. His bark turned from anxious to terrified, the kind that rattled in his chest. The noise triggered something primal in him, the memory of whatever had happened before I found him at the shelter. Stop, I yelled, stepping forward. Ethan had already moved. While the locksmith drilled through the gate lock, Ethan walked down the fence line and scaled the lower section with a grunt. His boots hit my yard on the other side. Barnaby lunged at him out of instinct, and Ethan without hesitation kicked him. Barnaby's yelp, high, sharp, broken, split the cold air. I will never forget that sound. I screamed his name, but he scrambled away, limping, terrified, bolting through the open gate the moment Ethan reached the latch from the inside, down the icy road, toward the blind curve. Oh God, Barnaby. I ran after him, slipping on the snow, lungs burning. I didn't look back. I didn't look at my father's face, or Ethan's smirk, or the men unloading equipment. There was only Barnaby, shivering, hurting, disappearing around the bend. I found him in a snowbank, trembling so hard I could hear his teeth click. His hip looked wrong, swollen, darkening under the fur. I scooped him up, sobbing from panic and adrenaline, his weight pulling at my arms. By the time I staggered back through the gate, breath shaking in the freezing air, Ethan and the others were halfway up my driveway. The truck's lift whined. The server racks rolled inside my home like they belonged there. Dad glanced over as if mildly concerned I'd taken too long. You're back, he said gently. Good, let's talk like adults now. They had breached the first line of my life without consequence. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. I didn't call Graham first. I called 911. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hit the numbers, Barnaby's weight heavy across my thighs as I sat on the cold floor just inside Everwood's front door. I could hear metal scraping and the thud of equipment dragging across my hardwood in the background. Willow Creek Dispatch, a woman answered. What's your emergency? This is Claire Morgan, I said. My father and brother just broke into my home. They forged a lease, kicked my dog, and they're unloading industrial equipment into my basement. I need an officer. Now. She asked for my address. I gave it. Then I sat there on the floor, one hand on Barnaby's fur, the other clutching the phone, listening to my house being taken apart. By the time Sheriff Daniel Collins pulled into the driveway, the truck's ramp was up, and one of the SUVs was parked at an angle like it belonged there. Snow had started again, soft flakes swirling in the air. Collins stepped out of his cruiser with the gait of a man who had seen a lot of small-town drama. He took in the scene, the truck, the SUVs, the men hauling crates, my father standing in the foyer with that apologetic half-smile he'd perfected over years of unpaid bills. Afternoon, folks, Collins said. Who wants to tell me what's going on? I said, forcing my legs to work. My knees felt like glass. They broke in. They don't live here. There was no permission. My dog Dad cut in smoothly. Officer, I'm Patrick Morgan. This is my son Ethan. We're not breaking in. Ethan has a valid lease to rent the basement. We're just moving his business equipment in. He reached into his coat and handed Collins the document. The sheriff put on his glasses, scanned the paper. This your signature, Miss Morgan? He asked without looking up. I stared at the loop of ink that looked exactly like my handwriting. The date 6 weeks ago, the notary stamp, the witness signature. No, I said. It looks like mine, but I was out of town that day at a conference in Boston. I can prove it. I have emails, boarding passes. Collins finally looked at me. His eyes weren't unkind. Just tired. I'm sure you do. But I'm not a handwriting expert and I'm not a judge. On its face, this appears to be a valid lease. That makes your brother a tenant. This is a civil matter. They kicked my dog, I said. He's in pain. They used a locksmith to break my gate. None of that is civil. He shifted. Did you see them kick the dog? Yes, Ethan did it. Ethan snorted. The dog came at me. I pushed it away. I didn't kick anything. The locksmith, still packing up his tools by the gate, raised a hand halfway. I was busy with the lock, he said. I didn't see, I heard barking, but... So it became what it always became in my family, their word against mine. I watched Collins glance between us, mentally slotting events into categories criminal, civil, messy, but ignorable. I saw the second he decided which this would be. If you believe the lease is forged, Miss Morgan, he said, you'll need to take that up in civil court. You can file to have it invalidated. Until then, I can't remove Mr. Morgan or his property from the premises without risking a wrongful eviction claim. I stared at him. Snowflakes melted on my eyelashes. So they get to stay and keep bringing in whatever they want because of a piece of paper they faked. His jaw flexed. I'm saying the law is particular about leases. I enforce the law as it's written. Dad put a hand to his chest, sighing theatrically. We're just trying to help our daughter, Sheriff. Her relationship with reality has been a bit fragile since college. She gets paranoid. My throat burned. I'm not paranoid. I'm prepared. That's why the deed isn't in my name. It's in Willow Creek Heritage Trusts. I'm the trustee, not the owner. Collins frowned. The what, the trust? Dad repeated smoothly. A technicality, family paperwork. No, we are not on the same page, I snapped. For the first time, Collins's eyes sharpened. Miss Morgan, who actually owns this house, the trust does, I said. I manage it. Graham Adler handles the legal side. Dad repeated the name, curling in his mouth like something sour. Collins sighed. All right, I'll make a note of that. But as of this minute, I've got a signed lease in my hand and a family dispute in front of me. I can't arrest anyone for moving into a space their paperwork says they're allowed to use. He turned to Ethan. You planning to live here too, or just run your business out of the basement? Just the rigs, Ethan said. Silent, low impact. You won't even know we're here. I pictured the rows of servers I'd seen on his Instagram story, blue lights blinking in a dark room, fans screaming so loud he had to shout over them. Everwood is a protected Victorian residence in a historic district, I said. You can't run an industrial operation here. There are codes. Ethan rolled his eyes. God, you're dramatic. Collins lifted his hands. Look, I'm not zoning enforcement. I'm here because someone called about a break-in. I see a lease. I see a locksmith who was let in by someone claiming to be family. Nobody's bleeding. Nobody's waving a weapon. If you want this resolved, you need a lawyer. When he left, his cruiser's taillights disappeared into the snow like the last bit of help I could reasonably hope for. Inside the house felt wrong. The wood floors I'd spent nights stripping were tracked with slush and dirt. Men I didn't know grunted as they maneuvered metal racks toward the cellar door. The air already felt warmer in a way I didn't like. Too many bodies, too much equipment, too much noise. See, Dad said, following me into the foyer, lease still in his hand. This doesn't have to be a big deal. Ethan just needs a place to run his business. You'll barely notice he's here. Family working together. Isn't that nice? You forged my name on a lease to invade the only safe place I've ever had, I said. That's not family. He clucked his tongue. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. I walked away before I did something I couldn't undo. Barnaby lay in the corner of the living room, panting, his eyes glassy. His hip was swelling, fur puffed up over the bruise. I knelt beside him, fingers gentle on his side. And something in me hardened in a way it never had before. They could gaslight me. They could twist the law, drag locksmiths and sheriffs into their play. But they had hurt him. That crossed a line I didn't even know I had until that moment. That night, the house hummed with unfamiliar sounds, voices, footsteps, the clatter of tools in the basement. I turned up the old radiators to try and drown it out, but the pipes rattled like they were protesting. Around midnight, the humming stopped. The quiet was so sudden it woke me. The air felt wrong. I shuffled to the hall thermostat. The little digital screen was dark. Come on, I muttered, pressing buttons that did nothing. In the kitchen, the fridge was silent, the tiny green light off. The house's electric buzz lights. Appliances, that background hum you never hear until it's gone, had vanished. Cold slid through my socks. The temperature was dropping fast. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement. The door creaked like a warning. Each step down felt slick with frost. The main breaker panel hung open. Wires that had been neatly anchored were now cut and dangling ends stripped like severed veins. Ethan's earlier words echoed in my head. Just checking the load. He hadn't been checking anything. He'd been planning this. The anger that rose then felt different from the old resentment I'd carried for years. This was clean, focused. It sliced through the fog of confusion and guilt like glass. They wanted me cold as shaken, desperate enough to agree to whatever solution they suggested next. I went back upstairs, layered every blanket I owned on the living room floor, and curled up beside Barnaby. He whined softly, head pressing into my ribs. I could see my breath in the air again. In the dark, lit only by my phone screen, I opened my contacts. Mom, Dad, Ethan. All still there from a life I didn't live anymore. I scrolled past them and hit Graham's number instead. He picked up on the second ring. Claire? They forged a lease, I said. Sheriff Collins wouldn't remove them. Ethan cut the main power. And my dog. My voice broke for the first time all day. Graham was quiet for a beat. I heard papers rustle, a keyboard clack. All right, he said. His tone shifted from human to lawyer in a heartbeat. Listen to me. You're not going to engage them tonight. You're going to document everything. Photos of the panel, the cut lines, the lease, any bruising on the dog. Time-stamped, backed up to the cloud. Tomorrow we start an identity theft and fraud complaint. And Claire, yeah, do not sign a single thing they put in front of you. Not one. They're escalating because they're desperate. That's good. Desperate people make sloppy legal mistakes. I lay awake long after we hung up, watching my breath fade in the dark. They thought they had trapped me in my own house. They hadn't realized yet that they'd also locked themselves inside my evidence file. New Year's Eve at Everwood House felt like standing at the center of two different worlds, one warm and golden, the other black and frozen, waiting for its moment to crack open. Inside, the great room glowed. The string quartet tuned their instruments softly. Warm lights cast pools of honey on the hardwood, and guests drifted in through the garden entrance with careful steps and wool coats dusted in snow. The mayor shook off his scarf by the coat rack. Donors from the Historical Society murmured over glasses of champagne. Joan Whitaker kept her notebook tucked under her arm, eyes bright, always observing. And Sheriff Collins, off-duty but unmistakably authoritative, stood near the fireplace sipping from a small glass of sparkling water, his badge clipped discreetly at his waist. Outside the front of Everwood House stayed dark as stone, curtains pulled, lamps off. The facade looked abandoned, a hollow Victorian relic left to freeze, exactly the illusion I needed. I moved through the warm room, checking details mechanically, napkins aligned, champagne chilled. Barnaby curled under the piano bench, tail thumping softly each time someone passed. Liam stood near the back doors, hands in his pockets, eyes on me, the kind of steady presence that somehow made the entire room feel less fragile. You okay? He asked when I passed him. I will be, I said. When it's over, he didn't push further. Instead, he adjusted his stance, so he blocked part of the draft slipping in from the old doorframe. A tiny gesture, a protective one. The kind of thing no one from my family had done for me in my entire life. Around 11:25 p.m., the quartet began playing something soft, almost haunting. Conversations mellowed into low hums. Champagne glasses clinked. The mayor laughed at something Joan said. I walked to the staircase landing overlooking the foyer, the exact place I'd chosen to stand when it happened. It gave me a vantage point of the door, the guests, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At 11:32 p.m., I felt it before I saw it. A faint vibration through the floorboards, a distant engine. The kind of instinct you develop after a lifetime of bracing for trouble. My family was near. I slipped behind the front parlor curtain, pulling the velvet edge just enough to see the driveway. The road beyond the gate was empty for half a second. Then headlights flared briefly before switching off. Two vehicles ghosted toward the tree line, my father's SUV and Ethan's battered sedan right behind it. They glided to a stop in the same spot where Dad had stalked me for hours earlier that month. Snow swallowed their tires. Cold air steamed from their hoods. My heart thudded once hard. Then the passenger door swung open and a figure hopped out. Kara, bundled in a puffy white jacket, holding her phone at arm's length. Oh God, she was live streaming. I could see the ring light reflection in her eyes even from here. Hey guys, she whispered breathlessly to her viewers. It's happening. We're about to take back what's ours. Her voice trembled with cold and adrenaline, and behind her, Ethan yanked up the hood of his coat, bolt cutters gleaming in his gloved hands. Patrick followed close behind, expression calm, paternal, rehearsed, like he was entering a church service, not a crime scene. My breath caught. They hadn't even tried subtlety. I left the window and walked into the great room. The music slowed when people noticed the change in my expression. Liam straightened. Sheriff Collins set his glass-down chest, rising with one deep inhale. "They're here," I said softly. The mayor blinked. "Your family?" I nodded. "Front gate." Collins moved toward the hall. "Okay, folks, if you could all stay where you are, this may get loud." A ripple of tension swept the room, but no one panicked. If anything, a grim, silent anticipation settled, like everyone knew they were about to witness something that shouldn't ever happen, but somehow always does in families like mine. I returned to the parlor window just as Ethan reached the gate. The snowfall thickened, swirling in the glow of the distant street lamp. Gunmetal clouds smothered the moon. My brother planted his feet, braced the bolt cutters, and squeezed. The metal groaned, resisted, then snapped. The lock I thought would take minutes to break fell into the snow in seconds. Kara gasped dramatically for her live stream audience. Patrick rested a hand on her shoulder as if comforting her through a heroic struggle. My stomach knotted. Ethan kicked the gate open. The iron bars clanged against the stone pillar. Snow shook loose from the trees overhead. The echo carried all the way to the house. "They're coming up the path," I said under my breath. I wasn't sure who I said it to, maybe myself, maybe the house. Beside me, Liam quietly appeared, his presence steady. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "you've already won more than you know." Before I could answer, the front door reverberated with a pounding thud. Ethan's first kick, then another. The frame shuddered. Guests near the foyer tensed. The quartet's bows froze midair. I walked to the staircase and took my place, hands clasped loosely in front of me. The third kick splintered the old lock. The door crashed inward. Cold air punched into the warm foyer like a shockwave. Ethan barreled through the doorway, chest heaving, bolt cutters swinging at his side. Snow clung to his hair. His eyes were wild, manic with entitlement. "Claire," he shouted. "It's over. Stop hiding." He froze. In front of him, 30 of Willow Creek's most respected residents. Warm lights, champagne, violins, and Sheriff Collins, who stepped forward slowly like a man approaching an unpredictable animal. Kara stepped in after Ethan phone raised. Her live stream caught everything: the smashed door, the bolt cutters, the stunned faces of the town's leadership. Oh my God," she whispered on camera. Patrick entered, last expression faltering when he realized what he'd walked into. His breath fogged in the warm air, his shoulders stiffened. "Evening," Collins said calmly, voice firm but not loud. "Ethan Morgan, step away from the doorway." Ethan blinked like he couldn't comprehend the reality in front of him. "What is this?" he snarled. Some setup?" "This is a party," the mayor said icily. "One you've just violently broken into." "I have a lease," Ethan shouted, waving the bolt cutters like proof. Graham stepped out from the crowd, trust deed in hand. "You have a forgery," he corrected. "And you just committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, property damage, and violation of a zoning cease and desist." Ethan whipped toward me on the stairs. "Claire, stop this. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I didn't move." "From now on," I said quietly, "everything goes through my lawyer." Something behind his eyes cracked. Collins raised a hand. Ethan Morgan placed the tool on the ground and stepped forward. "You can't," Ethan started. Kara suddenly backed away, still filming, voice trembling. "Ethan, you told me this was all legal." The betrayal in her tone pierced the room sharper than any yell. Even Ethan flinched. "Kara," he hissed, "stop recording," but she kept backing up, whispering to her phone's viewers, I didn't know he was going to break the door." Her live stream comments exploded in real time. Collins moved in, bolt cutters down, hands where I can see them. For a second, I thought Ethan might fight. His jaw clenched, his grip tightened. But then he saw the crowd, the mayor, the trustees, Joan with her notebook, Liam standing like a wall near the center of the room, and me, unmoving, unshaken. Ethan dropped the bolt cutters. They hit the floor with a metallic thud. Collins handcuffed him with practiced ease. Patrick stepped forward, hands out. "Sheriff, please. This is all a misunderstanding." "Claire's had a very stressful year," Patrick Morgan, Collins said, tone turning colder. "You're under arrest for forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and aiding in the violation of a zoning cease and desist." Patrick froze. What he whispered. "You thought no one would check the notary stamp?" Graham asked coolly. "It belongs to a woman who died 2 years ago." A murmur rippled through the room. Patrick looked directly at me, something desperate flaring in his eyes. "Claire, sweetheart, Tell him we can fix this. We're family." His voice cracked in a way I had never heard in my life, and maybe once years ago that crack would have split me open, but not anymore. "I don't owe you my life," I said softly, "or my home, or my silence." Colin stepped behind Dad and snapped the cuffs in place. Patrick didn't fight. His shoulders collapsed inward, the weight of decades finally dragging him down. Kara pressed herself into the corner of the foyer, shaking. I'm not part of this," she stammered to Collins when he turned toward her. "I didn't help. I just filmed." Collins nodded. "Put the phone down, Miss Blake. You'll be giving a statement." She lowered the phone. Her live stream ended suddenly, cutting to black. Outside, more squad cars arrived. Blue and red lights strobed across the snow, casting fractured colors through Everwood's stained glass. Officers stepped through the broken door and guided Ethan and Patrick outside, their heads ducked against the cold. Their footprints mixed with shattered wood and slush. The whole room was silent except for the distant fireworks beginning their countdown in town. I stood on the stairs staring at the open doorway. The wind curled through the entryway, stirring the edges of my blazer. Snowflakes drifted onto the floorboards I'd sanded by hand. Collins turned back to me. "Miss Morgan, you did the right thing." I didn't answer him. I wasn't sure I trusted my voice. One by one, the guests stepped forward. Quiet congratulations, warm hands on my shoulders. Liam's gaze steady and proud. Joan already flipping open her notebook. But I stayed on that step, frozen in the space between the life I'd been trapped in and the life I was finally choosing. At midnight, distant fireworks burst above Willow Creek. White gold red reflected in the glass of the open door. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the sound. A cold smile tugged at my mouth. A feeling sharp and clean, like stepping into a new world. They had come to take my house. But I wasn't the one who would leave it in handcuffs. The night didn't end when the squad cars pulled away. Not really. Even after the guests drifted out the garden entrance, after the quartet packed their instruments, and the last champagne glass was rinsed in the kitchen sink, Everwood House felt suspended in a strange, impossible quiet. Not the fearful quiet of the past weeks, but something steadier, grounded, like the house itself was finally exhaling after years of holding tension in its walls. I stood alone in the foyer, staring at the shattered front door. Snowflakes clung to the edges of the broken frame, melting into small, shining droplets that slid onto the wood floor. I should have felt angry, or sad, or violated. Instead, I felt empty, hollowed out, exhausted, and strangely weightless. Barnaby limped toward me through the moonlit hallway, nudging my leg gently before settling at my feet with a soft huff. His eyes followed mine to the broken door. "We'll fix it," I whispered, running my hand along his back. "We fix everything, don't we?" His tail thumped once, as if he agreed. The warmth of the night returned in pieces. Liam leaned quietly against the banister, hands in his pockets, watching me with that expression he only used when he thought I wasn't looking, concern, mixed with something softer. Graham gathered his files near the dining room table, murmuring into his phone about next steps, charges, statements. Sheriff Collins lingered near the threshold, surveying the wreckage like a man retracing a battlefield. "You did good tonight," Collins said when he caught my eye. His voice was low, free of official tone. Everyone saw the truth for themselves. No more gray area. No more family excuses. "Truth doesn't fix the door," I said lightly. He smiled. "But it fixes the story." He paused. "And stories matter around here." He tipped his hat, wished me a better New Year than the last, and stepped off the porch into the cold, disappearing into the swirl of snowfall. Graham approached next, his coat buttoned high against the draft. "I'll email you the paperwork first thing in the morning. Statements, arraignment, dates, restitution claims. It's going to be a long process, Claire, but you have every advantage now, because of tonight. Because of you," he corrected. "You built the case, you documented everything, you called the right people, and you forced the truth into the light." I nodded, unsure how to accept the praise. My whole life power had never belonged to me. Tonight wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. But power was a new feeling, and it hummed just beneath my skin. After Graham left, Liam stayed behind. He helped me sweep the splintered wood into piles, his movements slow and deliberate, as if giving me space to breathe between every scrape of the broom. The house was quiet except for Barnaby's soft breathing and the faint crackle of the fire in the great room. "You don't have to stay," I told him. But my voice didn't sound convincing. Maybe because I didn't want him to go. "I know," he said. He set the broom aside and leaned his shoulder lightly against the doorframe. "But I'm here anyway." We worked in silence for a while until the foyer felt less like a crime scene and more like a project that could be restored. When we finally stepped back, wind brushing in through the broken doorway, he studied me with that quiet intensity he never said out loud. "You handled them," he murmured. "All of them. You didn't break." "I've broken before," I said. "Just not tonight." "You didn't break tonight because you finally stopped fighting alone." I wanted to argue, to deny it, to insist I'd done everything by myself. But the truth pressed against me, warm and undeniable. He was right. The room full of witnesses, the law, the trust, the community, him. For the first time in my life, I had chosen who stood beside me. When Liam finally left after promising to come back in the morning to help board up the doorway, the house settled into silence again. But it was a different kind of silence, a good one, a real one. I climbed the stairs slowly, Barnaby trailing beside me, and stood at the landing where I had watched the arrests unfold hours earlier. I rested my palm on the railing. The wood felt warm, smooth, like the house was alive beneath my hand. My phone buzzed. A single new email, no subject line, no greeting, just an attachment. And one sentence: "Your father isn't the only one who kept secrets." It was from an anonymous address, but the writing style, sharp-clipped, overly formal, was unmistakably my mother's. My breath tightened. Barnaby looked up at me, ears lifted. I opened the attachment. A scanned image of an old document. Yellowed edges. A name I recognized. A signature I didn't. And a property address, another house not far from Willow Creek. Something my mother never told me. Something tied to my name. Something she'd kept hidden for decades. I didn't know if it was a warning, or an invitation, or a threat. But one thing was certain: my family's war wasn't over. It had only changed battlefields. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. Because this story isn't over. Not for me, not for Everwood, and definitely not for the people who thought they could rewrite my life with forged papers and fake tears. What happened that New Year's Eve was only the first chapter of holding them accountable. The next chapter. Well, let's just say the truth has a way of crawling out of the dark, especially when people think they've buried it deep. Stay here, there's more coming.